Recently, you just started your brand new company, nutrition company. Tell me a little bit about that whole process and like what your goals are with that.
Yeah. So I have been working in fitness, whether it's nutrition or strength training, for almost 15 years. And starting my own company is something that people had really pushed me to do. And I think I was really hesitant to start that because I wasn't really sure where I fit. I worked on my master's in nutrition. So I kind of got more of a clinical, almost medical side of nutrition. I have worked in a more aesthetic space with different coaching companies online where I'm really helping people, with physique transformation. And neither one of those felt like it for me. They both felt like parts of what I wanted to do, but they didn't feel like the thing I wanted to do. I want to help people improve their health. I want to help people improve their lifestyle. And of course, I want to empower people to know that they can like change what they look like. But the mental side of it was so important to me because the last thing I wanted to do was enable kind of this toxic diet culture stuff and help people judge themselves based off of a number or based off of how many pounds they've lost in what period of time. And so over the last couple of years, I've started working with more and more jiu-jitsu athletes on performance. When to weight cut, how to weight cut. If you don't weight cut, what do we do then? And it has been so cool to see not only people changing the way they perform, but also just changing their understanding of what good nutrition means, what performance nutrition means. And so, yes, I still help the people with their physique transformation. But I feel like when it's being driven by what do I want my life to look like? How do I want to perform? How do I want to feel day to day? And really understanding just how the overall lifestyle contributes to performance, physique, whatever it is, health. It's so much more rewarding for me. So that's really what I'm trying to do now is make nutrition make sense. Simplify it, bring it beyond like, yeah, sure, being able to see your muscles is really cool, but understanding why that's working and how to make decisions and trade-offs so you don't feel like it's a pass fail situation. I'm just trying to make it very like practical for people.
Yeah, there. I watched a Jubilee recently that said "fat versus skinny" or "fat versus fit" or something like that. And the I don't want to call them fat. Well, they're larger, like they're obese people, right? Taking up the fat side. But the common critique that they had is like one intimidation within the fitness industry of like they see all these jacked people talking about how you need to do this, you need to do that, and then two, not understanding just like the basic principles of where to start in nutrition. How do you point that out to like, hey, it's not as complicated as you think it is. Like, it's actually very simple to track your food, put yourself in a caloric deficit, move a little bit more than you typically do. How do you break that barrier to let these people know, like, don't be intimidated?
Yeah, it honestly comes down to it being highly individualized. Not everyone's going to have the same starting place. Not everyone's going to have the same needs, to be honest. I mean, overall, like the principles apply to everyone, but where each individual is getting started, what their bandwidth is going to be a little bit different. So, how we apply these concepts is going to be different. So, for example, one of my clients is a woman in maybe her 50s and full-time job, has never been invested in fitness, and she wants to be able to walk up multiple flights of stairs and not be breathless, right? She wants to be able to live a long happy life, and she's realizing I'm not going to be able to take care of myself if I keep going the way I'm going. So for her, I explained what macros were, but only so she could understand where can I get good protein sources? What's a carb? What does it do for my body? What's a fat? What does it do for my body? But we don't stress too much about are you within 5 to 10 grams of your, all your macros, right? We're more concerned with her food selection and just changing that. She is down like 15 pounds. She is walking every day. So we have 3 different types of activity. We aren't even, resistance training yet. We've just tried to develop a more active lifestyle where she gets a daily walk, she interrupts sedentary time, and then 2 days a week, she really tries to kind of push her heart rate on her walks. And just that alone, she has transformed her lifestyle. And so that's one like very beginner way to go about it where we're just focused on the concepts. food quality. She knows how she can integrate cookies and desserts and how to make decisions when she's eating out because she understands the food quality. Now, she doesn't understand everything about energy balance yet, but we'll get there. So, we start with what each individual needs. Now, I might have a much more advanced person that needs to be a little bit more dialed in. And so then a lot of it comes down to education, and only implementing the tools that is going to help that person get to the next level. So a lot of it comes down to me understanding where this person is at and then giving them the information that's going to have the biggest effect with the minimum effective dose.
I know a lot of like nutrition answers are going to be it depends, and you know what I mean, like because it truly is based on, like you just said, individuals. But what is the biggest hurdle that you see when it comes to jujitsu athletes when you start working with them to get their nutrition on board or to get that path started?
And there's so many.
Give
There's
me a
so
couple. Give me.
Yeah, so there's so much misinformation out there. So much misinformation about what good nutrition is. And I feel like jujitsu is becoming a little bit like the CrossFit space where CrossFit was like obsessed with paleo. And paleo isn't the
Yeah.
worst thing ever. But it's also like your diet shouldn't really have a name, to be honest. If your diet has a name, I feel like there's rules and like things are off limits. And that's just like not how it works. That can help people adhere, but that's not the most important thing. So, kind of missing the forest for the trees, I think happens a lot in jujitsu. I've noticed a lot of jujitsu athletes are into the carnivore diet right now. And I'm like, that is quite possibly the worst thing you could do for yourself because you need carbs. I think the other thing is people get really, really tied to a weight class.
Mm.
Wanting to be a certain weight class, wanting to compete in a certain weight class, thinking that smaller is always better when that's not always the case. And sometimes that inhibits people from achieving their full potential, whether that is the physique they want, the level of performance they want, even being able to train and recover the way they need to perform at a high level. And so I think like this hyper focus on needing to be a certain weight class instead of listening to your body and say, hey, with someone training as much as you're training, biofeedback isn't great. Like we might just need to give your body what it needs, see how you feel there. And even if we want to end up at this certain weight class eventually, we're going about it the wrong way right now. We might need to take a more roundabout way to get there and take a little bit more time. But that really depends on the individual.
You mentioned in there like the carnivore diet, which is basically an elimination diet. That's why a lot of people have great success with it, right? Because they end up eliminating maybe foods that aren't the best for them. How do you go back and forth, or how do you handle your clients when they say, "Hey, well, I did keto for 6 months and I lost all this weight and I felt great. Why can't I just do a keto diet?"
Yeah.
Like, how do you get them out of that mindset of like, look, you need everything.
Yeah. So I never force my clients to do anything, is the first thing. So it starts with education. Typically, though, if someone comes to me and they say that they had great results on keto, it's normally followed up with, I had great results on keto. I felt great for a month. And then I gained all the weight back. I crashed. I don't understand why. And then that gives me the opportunity to say, I have some ideas why, and I can ask them questions about that. And I can explain the reasons why, keto, most people will feel great on keto for 2 weeks. And then after that 2 week mark, especially if they're an athlete, that's when they're going to start to feel a little bit more run down. Sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes people feel horrible initially, and then their body adapts a little bit more and they start to feel a little bit better. But the longer they stay on it, they usually start feeling like crap. And so then I explain, hey, there's nothing wrong with a high fat diet as long as we're checking off our bases in these other areas. As long as we're still getting enough protein, as long as we're still getting enough carbs for whatever performance you have, for cognitive function, for thyroid health. Some people do prefer a higher fat diet, and that's okay. We still want to make sure that we're taking care of these other things, and we want to track your biofeedback to make sure that you do respond best to a high fat diet. A lot of people get attached to an idea of what they respond best to just because of a short term experience where they felt good while they were doing that. And there's usually a lot of confounding factors associated with that. The other thing is I really explain the importance of an exit strategy. I don't think everyone needs to go through like a 16-week fat loss phase. Some people honestly just need a new lifestyle, like that client I told you about at the beginning. She just needed a new understanding of what food meant and a new understanding of what an active lifestyle meant, right? We didn't do anything crazy. So some people just need that. Other people, if you're a little bit more advanced and you are going to go through, like, I'm going to go through a 16-week deficit. Okay, we need to have an exit strategy after that and realistic expectations for that. And if we just do keto or carnivore or something like that, there is no exit strategy. We don't know what knobs we're turning. Are we going to go from just like only eating meat, potatoes, and I don't know, bell peppers to then incorporating everything again and expect all of the changes that happened while we were on that diet to maintain? No, that's not realistic. So, emphasizing the importance of understanding why we're doing what we're doing. And then, okay, do we need an exit strategy if what we're doing currently is not sustainable? And what are our realistic expectations for that exit strategy when we kind of transition phases?
Yeah, when when I'm on social media, I see these carnivore diet people, these flexible dieting people, right? And personally, I believe in flexible dieting, macronutrients, right? You do need carbs, all that stuff. But sometimes, I'm not going to lie, sometimes these carnivore PhDs come up with some metadata analysis things that they interpret that they might be cherry picking from the studies that prove that oh, you actually don't need to worry about your cholesterol. High fat diets are good. And I'm like sitting there like, I don't, it sounds really good, but I think that's wrong.
Yeah. So the issue with research is, one, there is a lot of cherry picking, but you can't just look at the conclusion of a study. You also have to look at how it was done, what the confounding factors are. A lot of people, you can find research to support nearly anything.
Hmm.
And so you have to dig a little bit. You can't just take the conclusion at face value.
Yeah, that I noticed that when I was in college, a lot of times I would see people talk about, like, in the conclusion it will say what you think it says, but if you actually read through the research, it kind of not contradicts, but it goes into deeper like detail of like what they're talking about. Like, yeah, it's they say this in the conclusion, but if you actually read deeper, something that you might be looking for actually isn't supported through the research. Like,
Yeah. And that's what makes it so hard. That's what makes it so confusing, is because, like, nutrition is a space where people have their own experience with nutrition every day. So if you experience
mhm.
something that felt good to you, you will likely, if you try to find research to support it, you will likely find something that supports it. And you might not be looking at that research with an unbiased eye. Um, and so it's really confusing. It's one of the few spaces where, one, the barrier to become an expert at it is honestly pretty low. It's hard to distinguish what is a legit credential and what is not, what is legit experience and what is not. And everyone has their own personal experience with nutrition. Nutrition is also social. Nutrition has, like, in some cases, religious implications. And if you start feeling like one of those areas is getting attacked, then it's going to be really hard to stay open minded, which is why, like, honestly, the basics are all you really need to know. And then how do I make this work within my personal boundaries? So I have had, like, vegan and vegetarian plant-based clients come to me and ask, "Do I need to start eating meat?" And I explain the benefits of eating meat. I explain why it can sometimes make good nutrition more balanced and a little easier to adhere to. And then I explain how you can do it without eating meat. These are the challenges that you'll come across, but it is possible, and here is how you do it. And I let them make that decision. And so I think when we get too focused on the methods of nutrition and we lose sight of the concepts underpinning it, that's really where all most of the disagreements happen. But if we just focus on the fundamental concepts, there's so many different ways that can be applied.
Let's go into a little bit of the fundamentals. What are, for people at home that don't know what macros are, what are macros and how do they play into your diet percentage?
Yeah. So macronutrients, these are energy providing source of food, basically calories. So protein, carbs, fat. So protein is going to help build and retain muscle. Its importance varies a little bit if we are in a surplus or if we are at maintenance, or if you are not an extremely lean individual. It can be on kind of the lower side of what is recommended, so about zero point 0.7 or zero point 0.8 grams per pound of body weight. Now, if you are
Is
in a
that goal or current?
I'm sorry,
Is that goal or current body weight?
current. Well, I guess it depends a little bit on the person, but we're thinking maintenance.
Okay.
or slight surplus, right? So not too much changing there. Now, if you are in a deficit and so you're in a caloric deficit, you're consuming less calories than you are spending. If you are a very lean individual, it's going to become more and more important to keep protein high, because muscle is an expensive tissue to keep around. And when we are in a caloric deficit, when we are losing weight, we don't really get to choose, are we losing fat or are we losing muscle? We're going to lose a combination of both of it. But keeping protein high is going to encourage our body to keep more muscle around, because protein is best stored as muscle, basically. It's best stored when it's building muscle. So that's going to be the easiest way for our body to use protein. So if we keep protein high, it's going to help our body say, hey, actually, let's keep muscle, let's get rid of fat. And so that's why the most basic reason why protein is important when we're in a caloric deficit. So we have a bit of a range. Most people will say the range for protein is going to be 0.7 to 1.2 grams per pound of body weight. Now, carbs. Lots of people are scared of carbs, but carbs are super important, especially for athletes. They drive our brain function, our cognitive function. They are very important for thyroid. So one thing that we see when people have been dieting for a very long period of time is they start to have symptoms of low thyroid. Their blood test might even come back low thyroid. And while there are purely hormonal imbalanced reasons why people would have low thyroid, if we are over exercising, if we are chronic dieting, if our calories do stay super low, if we maintain extremely low body fat, we can expect to see symptoms of low thyroid. But it doesn't necessarily mean that something is hormonally wrong with us. It could be driven by lifestyle. And a lot of hormonal imbalances are driven by lifestyle. Now, again, not everything. If we have Hashimoto's, if, we are taking care of our lifestyle and thyroid is still coming back low, it's probably increasing carbs probably isn't going to make a difference. But for a lot of people who are struggling with these things, it can make a difference. On the other hand, when we see people who are chronically overweight, chronically underactive, and we start to see symptoms of hormonal dysfunction, lots of people think my hormonal dysfunction is preventing me from getting in shape, when actually changing the lifestyle is going to start to drive the processes that's going to help them stay fitter and kind of reverse those hormonal imbalances. So while there are things occasionally that are completely outside of the control of lifestyle, a lot of it is driven by lifestyle. But I got off the point of why carbs are helpful.
All good, all good.
So carbs are the primary fuel source for our brain. They are the primary fuel source for actually building muscle as well. So when we are in a surplus, I'm more concerned with carb intake usually than protein, because carbs are the fastest thing that's going to get to our muscles to help us recover and help us build. They're important for athletes, especially an athlete who is in a deficit and who is trying to make weight for competition. The rules kind of change here. I'm going to worry less about protein. I'm going to bring it to the minimum so I can keep their carbs as high as possible, because they need that to fuel their activity. They need that for recovery. So carbs are big source for muscle building, big source for energy, big source for recovery. And then fats. Fats are important for hormonal health. But the thing with fats is that they are more calorically dense than protein and carbs. And so they're easy to overeat. They also tend to be invisible. Think salad dressings, think cooking oils, think fatty meats. We see a piece of steak, we don't think, some people might think fat, but a lot of people think big juicy steak, protein, and a lot of fat, right? So it's really easy to rack up too many calories in the form of fat because they tend to be invisible. They are more calorically dense. We don't get a lot of bang for our buck. And I think the biggest misconception with nutrition is we hear high protein or low carb or fat's important for hormones. And then we think, okay, more is better for fat because that's good for hormones. More is better for protein because that's important for muscle. As little carbs as possible, because who needs that? When really it's more isn't better, less isn't better, optimal is optimal. And all of these things just have to exist within the proper range for your lifestyle, your health, your goals, your current body composition. And so we have to get away from this more is better idea and really dig into, okay, what is optimal for me and what I'm trying to achieve.
You mentioned in there, people not realizing, fat being invisible because they see something and they're like, "Oh, that's pure protein." They don't take into consideration other things. When I was in the Navy and I was like a fitness leader for the Navy, I was talking to people about, protein, carbs, and fats, like your macronutrients. And one guy was like, "Oh man, I don't eat too many carbs. I just drink like juice and eat fruit." And I was like, that literally is carbs. Like, that
Oh
is
my
exactly what
goodness.
carbs are. Yeah. Yeah. What common misconceptions do you see when it comes to what's like you mentioned the steak before? What other things do you see that people might not realize are proteins or fats or carbohydrates that are in their diet that might be affecting how losing weight and stuff like that?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people think, I mean, similar to the steak, an egg or peanut butter. And we know that those things have protein in them, and people think that those are good protein sources. But there's a difference between something that has protein and is a good protein source. So, an egg, for example, has 6 grams of fat, 6 grams of protein. It's a 1-to-1 ratio. Your protein typically needs to be significantly higher than your fat for the day. And if we're relying on something with a 1-to-1 ratio of protein and fat, it's going to be hard to keep calories in check. It's going to be hard to keep protein high and fat low. And so, distinguishing between lean protein sources, fatty protein sources, I think is an eye opener for a lot of people. I think the other thing with this focus on healthy ingredients or clean ingredients can be really misleading. If we look at, there's a company that I love. I'm not going to say the name just because I don't want to like dissuade people from using them because it's delicious and it is good. And they use quality ingredients and they make all these cakes and treats and stuff, but they're using things like nuts and seeds and dates instead of flour and sugar. And what we see is this is a very calorically dense,
Mm,
tiny dessert. Dates are like the highest glycemic thing that you could consume, and then they're just like blending nuts together and mixing it up, and it is delicious. But a little tiny dessert from them is easily 3, 4, 500 calories, depending on which one it is, and it's tiny, and you could have an entire slice of a regular cake for that same caloric amount. And people think that, okay, the ingredients matter more. But when we're talking about overall
mm,
health, yes, food quality matters to a certain extent, but if relying too much on quote unquote clean ingredients is causing you to overeat calories consistently, and then that's causing you to maintain unhealthy body weight or unhealthy body composition, because again, our body doesn't really care where those calories are coming from. If we're eating too much, we're going to gain weight. And not that gaining weight is bad, but if it causes us to perpetually stay at a heavier than healthy weight range, then that can create a lot of frustration because it can feel like you're doing everything right. I'm trying to focus on the right things. But again, we don't understand the principle of energy balance and what foods are calorically dense and what foods aren't. In that case, you're much better off having a real piece of cake, lower calories, less dense, and moving on with your day, and, just not having that be something that you do every day. Because that's the other thing we see. When we start thinking that we're eating clean ingredients, people will incorporate that into their life every day because they think it's good for them. They think it's
mm.
clean, not realizing that they are jacking their total caloric intake up significantly.
That's one thing that I had. I'm down a little over 20 pounds right now since the last time we talked. One thing that I noticed too is I was like uh, eating the complete cookies. You know what I mean? Like
Yes. They don't
Thompson
even
Brothers
taste
complete.
good.
Yeah, they weren't good, but I was like, oh, it's got like 20 grams of protein in it, and I would eat the cookie, and then I would realize after a while, I was like, wait a second, it recommends half a cookie at 250 calories. I was like, this whole cookie is 500 calories and I'm just downing like one or two a day. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? I don't even realize it because it's not satiating. It doesn't fill my stomach. It's like a snack. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And it's just like baffling to me. Like I was like, oh my gosh. Another thing is like people will see like trail mix or something
Yes.
like that, or like mixed nuts, and they're like, oh, I could eat this all day and be good. I don't have to worry about it. But once, like you mentioned, the caloric value of those handful of nuts is much higher than you think it is. Like and there, once again, satiation doesn't happen, right?
Well,
I could eat like a handful of nuts and I'm like, let's keep going.
you have salty and sweet, which we can talk
Yeah.
about what that does to our satiety cues in a second, but that is easy to eat. We are not going to get full. I like to say whenever my clients will say something like, well, I'm just not getting full off of these snacks. I'm like, you're not supposed to get full off of snacks. Snacks are literally designed to have you keep eating them. They keep peanuts on the bar so that you eat them, then you're thirsty, then you're hungry, and it just goes in an infinite loop. Like you're not supposed to feel full from snacks. So also having that expectation. But I think it's so funny that you mentioned the protein cookie, because just this week, one of my clients asked me for a protein cookie recipe. And I said, I don't personally have a protein cookie recipe that I use. I'm sure I could find you one online. But my personal protein cookie recipe, if I want to have a big meal, I'll have like lean protein, so like chicken. So my dinner will be focused on protein and veggies pretty much. And then I have a real cookie. That is my protein cookie. And if you want it to just be a snack, then you have a protein shake and a cookie. Or, wild idea, you just have a cookie. So I think like really lowering the shame around those kinds of foods is so important. I think really lowering, and this doesn't mean that like you're going to go off the walls and start eating junk food all the time. But typically, when we incorporate these types of foods on a regular basis, we become less fearful of them. We crave them less. They become less of a big deal. And so I think really kind of like understanding like you can have a cookie, you can have a brownie, and it's not doing anything inherently wrong in your body.
Yeah, people. I know every once in a while I'll fall trap to it too, thinking like, oh man, I've been so good this week with hitting my numbers. I can't have a brownie this weekend, or I shouldn't have the cheat meal with my wife on Saturday or something like that. Like, but really, when it comes to nutrition, right? You're when you're designing a nutrition plan, you're not focusing merely day by day, right? You're focusing on the grand scheme of things, like a caloric deficit of the week. Like you want to be X amount of calories for the week or the month or whatever. That's what you want to be under for weight loss, right? And so when people, so that's an easy way. Once I realized that, like, well, actually, in the grand scheme of things, I'm still going to be in a calorie deficit for the week if I have this cookie. Like it's not that big of a deal. Now I shouldn't eat the whole box of Oreos, but,
Yeah.
but having one is okay, right?
For sure. And, the knobs change and your expected or anticipated rate of loss, for example, matters. And for some people, I have some people that, we take it super slow, and these people are down 20, 30 pounds, and we aren't doing that typical 16-week deficit. We're more focused on the lifestyle and the decisions. And if they feel like, hey, this new way of making decisions is really sustainable for me, and I don't care that I'm losing weight like a quarter pound a week or a half pound a week, and maybe that is equivalent to like on average half a pound to 2 pounds per month, depending on what their life was like. Just not having to stress about it so much. They know it's coming off, they know they're making the change, and they don't have to stress about the perfection aspect of it. And so I think that there's also understanding like you can go about this in different ways. You can do a hard and fast deficit where you want to see a more significant amount of weight loss in a targeted period of time. Then we're going to take a break from that. And we're going to have an exit strategy, or we can take the slow route where we're going to have more flexibility. It's going to be slower progress. And also, it's not going to feel quite as obsessive or hard.
So satiety, let's talk about that a little bit, because one thing I know that I have an issue with sometimes is I'll make a meal, and I'll have like my 200 grams of protein at every meal. Not 200 grams of like protein, but like measurement wise, people.
Yeah.
Like,
I got
I'm
you.
not eating 600 grams of protein
Yeah.
a day. No. But my meals are typically 200 grams of protein, a little bit of carbs, some veggies, some fruit maybe, and then my issue is a lot of the times my satiety isn't met because my calories for the meal are kind of like cut throughout the day. So at home, for people listening, the feeling of being full, what foods can they eat that have that effect, right? I recently saw someone talk about volumizing, right? So instead of eating like a cup of white rice, you could eat like 3 cups of cauliflower rice, right? And there's more fiber and stuff like in that in it. What can people do to like help build that satiety so they don't want to snack, so they don't want to continue to eat and overeat?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing is understanding that hunger is a normal sensation. A lot of people think hunger is only something that you're going to experience in a deficit, or that it's bad, or that it means you're starving. Hunger is something that you can experience at maintenance, in a deficit, even in a surplus. That's kind of crazy when you're already eating more than you need, but like early stages of a surplus, you may still feel hunger. But it's a normal sensation. It's not bad, right? So we don't need to freak out when we experience that. Now, there are things that we can do to improve our satiety response. So, satiety response just means feeling full or feeling satisfied, even. Typically, we want to stop eating before we feel like, oh man, I can't have anything else, right? At that point, maybe we've gone a little bit too far. But there's a lot of things that drive satiety. Emotional state can drive satiety, the setting can drive satiety, the types of foods we're eating can drive satiety. So you mentioned like fiber and having higher volume meals. So one way that we can do it is focus on low calorie, high volume meals. This will be things like vegetables. I actually personally consider rice. I don't think rice is super calorically dense. For sure, you can have more cauliflower rice than actual rice. But then again, we may not hit that hedonic sense of satiety where we're like, I have enjoyed what I ate. And
Mm.
so sometimes it's worth it to just have the rice and understand it's not going to be as much food, but we're going to enjoy it more. We're going to feel like I had that culinary experience that I wanted to have. Right. And so some of it is balancing those things. Because the other thing that can happen is if we focus so much on low calorie foods and we have this giant mound of food, it's all veggies, cauliflower rice, maybe some protein on there, our stomach will mechanically fill up, which will signal to our brain, I've had enough. But then in 30 minutes, in an hour, we're going to feel hungry again because we didn't get the calories we needed. So it's multifaceted. We want to find the balance between getting the calories we need, which is where tracking can come in handy, or even just having an understanding of what portion sizes actually look like. So we know, okay, I'm actually getting enough for this period of time, with things like high volume foods. So we can mechanically fill up and we can get the calories we need. So we're meeting both triggers for satiety, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But typically, foods that are considered satiating are going to be foods that are high in fiber. Protein is very satiating. Fat will slow down digestion, so that can help with satiety as well. Potatoes are the most satiating food. Potatoes are great for you, super nutrient dense, super satiating. So we can incorporate those types of things into our diet. We can also avoid things that lessen satiety, which can be like having salt and sugar together, things that just say, hey, I don't care how full I am, I can keep eating this for forever, right? We can focus on having fewer, bigger meals so that we can have enough calories and enough food at one time instead of snacking throughout the day. A lot of people think they're afraid of hunger. And so they'll say, I'm just going to snack. I'm going to have a bunch of tiny meals. So I don't feel hungry throughout the day. But then you never actually feel full. So just committing to having fewer, larger meals works for a lot of people. So it also depends on like your response to hunger. And then there's other things like not getting enough sleep. Hunger is going to be higher when you don't get enough sleep. And so again, that lifestyle aspect comes into play. Activity has an effect on hunger. Hydration has an effect on hunger. So hunger is driven by so much more than just what your body needs and how many calories you've eaten.
You mentioned in there tracking. Oh, do you recommend people track their weight? How often you recommend obviously you recommend people track their weight, but how often you recommend people track their weight to make sure that they're losing or gaining or maintaining? Sorry.
Yeah. So it depends on the person. Different people have different relationships with the scale. Different people have different relationships with, what they want to see. But if we are looking at weight loss, for example, we don't want to just compare one random weigh in one week to another random weigh in the next week because we expect the scale to fluctuate. We expect it to change. The weight scale is measuring everything. It's measuring how much muscle you have. It's measuring how much bone you have. It's measuring how much adipose tissue, fat you have. But it's also measuring the amount of water in your cells, the amount of food that is sitting in your stomach or your bowels, how much you have sweat. And so many different things will affect those factors. So we expect body weight to fluctuate 1 to 2% of your total body mass per day. And so if we just compare random data points, one weigh in one week to one weigh in the next week, it could look like no changes happened. It could look like we gained weight, and that can be really frustrating. So I like to look at weigh ins as just data points. And we want to take at least 3 or 4. Every day is great, just so we can take the average that week. And now I want to go a step further. And I don't only care about the average week to week, I care about the trend over time. Maybe our average is the same for 3 weeks in a row. What do our high weigh-ins and our low weigh-ins look like? And what does that look like over time? Because so much matters more than the scale. And so if we're able to look at it objectively just as data, I like to say the more the better, because then we just have more data. If there is that emotional component, and there's different strategies that I work with my clients on to kind of neutralize the scale a little bit, and make it not an obsessive thing, just an informative thing, or ditch the scale altogether and realize that's not our only way to track progress and success.
Yeah, I feel like I'm at like right now at like a plateau of weight. I'm obviously getting leaner and stuff like that. Even my wife has noticed it, and so it's like that. Hearing that, having those outside entities saying like, "Hey, Travis, your face doesn't look as fat," and I'm like, "Thank you so much, I appreciate that." Those are also great ways to know that it's working, right? Because a lot of times your scale is going to stay the same. A lot of times, I see myself this every day, right? And so if I don't see someone for a week or two and they're like, "You've been losing weight?" Like, I'm like, "Yeah, I have." I
Yeah.
have, like, that reignites the fire underneath you. So, like you mentioned, like, it's not always the scale or whatever. Like, a lot of times it's these external things that I've noticed too. And you mentioned earlier your client that's a complete lifestyle change. My mom recently, she started her weight loss journey, and she did the hard part first. She's like cleaned up her diet, and she's made like a lifestyle change of not eating as much pasta, not eating as much bread, and not saying because they're carbs, but because it's easy for her to overeat those, and she recognized that, and so she's
Mhm.
like stopped doing it. And she's like, but I'm so tired, I just can't move. Like when I get home from work, I'm on my feet, 12 hours a day, blah blah blah. She's like, I just can't go to the gym. I'm just too exhausted, too busy, blah blah blah. And I was like, hey mom, that's okay. Like you just like keep I think you should start tracking your food next. Like you're obviously a very active person. Start tracking your food. Like just see how much you're eating, what you're eating, and then, adjust from there. There's a lot of apps out there, right? Like Macro Factor, MyFitnessPal, Carbon. All these apps are great for doing that. Do you work when you work with your clients? Do you work with apps? Do you have like a specific app that you recommend to people, or how does that work for tracking their food?
Yeah, my favorite app to use is Chronometer. Most of my clients track their macros. Not all of them do. I like to look at tracking macros as a tool. It educates you on what portion sizes look like. It educates you on what, a typical meal will look like. So then if you're eating out, you've tracked this a million times. You're going to be better at making estimates or making decisions on something that, will help you hit your goals. But I like Chronometer because my Fitness Pal counts up, shows you I might be saying this wrong. It shows you what you have left for the day,
Oh
which
yeah,
can
yeah,
kind
yeah.
of which can kind of put you into a scarcity mindset. Shoot, I only have 20 carbs left today, you know? And then you can start to worry about that. Chronometer is the opposite. It shows you what you have already consumed. And so, I don't know, mentally for me, and I found with a lot of my clients, that has helped them. That small
Mm.
detail of, instead of seeing how much you have left, just focusing on what you've already eaten. So it kind of takes you out of that scarcity mindset. But I do use tracking macros with most of my clients, not all of them. The clients who I don't use tracking macros with will either come up with templates, and so I'll teach them how to put together a meal, and we focus on weighing our food or measuring our food to get accurate portion sizes, to eventually know, hey, I can probably eyeball that pretty well. And then we go through different techniques we can use to practice estimating. I have a lot of people that are like, I don't want to track for the rest of my life. I don't want to, always have to weigh my food. I get that I should do it sometimes, but not always. And so we work on how we can really make it a part of their lifestyle instead of something that feels like an obligation or a demand. And I honestly think weighing your food is more important than tracking it. If you
Mm.
know I'm supposed to have 3 or 4 meals that look kind of like this, you can just measure your food and boom, you got it. But yeah, those are the primary tools that I use.
So let's switch over a little bit to jujitsu athletes, a little bit more focused. What you mentioned during the start of the conversation, eating for performance versus eating for aesthetics or general lifestyle. How do those different or how do those differ for people?
Yeah, so if you're trying to diet and train for aesthetics, you're probably going to experience some performance deficits. And performance isn't always going to be great because you're going to be in a caloric deficit. You're probably going to maintain a leaner physique than is optimal for performance. And that's great and that's fine. But that's why it's so important to understand what your goals are. I think the biggest time that I see this is I'll have like a lower rank, want to cut down to a super lightweight class, and he's trying to make the decision between I want to be strong, I want to grow into this weight class, but I want to make the weight class now. And I don't feel like I'm strong enough for the heavier weight class. And so I just want to cut down to this lower weight class. And most of the time, I encourage them, especially if they're at a lower rank, to not spend time cutting weight. Building muscle is so hard. Building muscle takes so much time. And so in my head, if you spend all of your lower belt career cutting down to a smaller weight class when you could be spending all of that time growing into a weight class, building muscle, and then once you're happy with your strength, once you're happy with how you're performing and where your jujitsu technique is, if at that point you want to cut down, then I think that is a better time to cut down. But like, don't waste precious time that you could be building muscle, which is going to aid in injury prevention. It's going to aid in performance. It's going to aid in longevity. It's going to help with so many things. I don't want to waste that precious time trying to shrink because building muscle doesn't work very well when you go like 3 months on and 3 months off. It works really well when we're dedicated to it for a longer period of time. So I think for performance, we're looking at, I mean, aesthetics too. We're looking at a long-term thing. I don't think a lot of people necessarily want these huge transformations in their physique. Most people just want to lean up a little bit and they're happy with that. A few people really want to see size difference or really want to see shape difference, and that takes a lot of time. But that's kind of more where performance is. Performance, I like to look at the long-term view of what is our ultimate goal and what is going to help us lay a good foundation to get there.
Yeah, and so how does food choice differ between uh someone that wants to eat performance, like if someone is a jiu-jitsu athlete, like how can they look at their meals as like, oh, this is a high performance meal for myself?
Yeah, carbs are super important for athletes. When we are, getting into a caloric deficit, if we are trying to lose some weight, maybe not like a traditional weight cut, which we can get into the difference between weight loss and weight cutting in a second, but we're going to be probably a little bit more particular around meal timing and nutrient timing to fuel our training sessions. And then it really depends on, are we talking about a recreational athlete? Are we talking about a professional athlete? How many hours a day are spent training? What does your life look like outside of that? But typically, athletes need a lot more food than they realize. Most athletes are under eating. And so sometimes that means we aren't having the cleanest foods, to be honest. I wrote in one of my athletes' training programs that I wanted him to, he didn't have a lot of time getting between work and his final training session. He wasn't going to be able to stomach a large meal. He was going to need calories though. And I said, grab a bag of gummies, man.
Mm.
You need the carbs, you need the calories. Like, it's not always gonna, you can eat in a very clean way, but it's gonna be a lot higher volume. It might not be as easy to stomach that much volume. So if push comes to shove, like, our calories are gonna matter more, our carbs are gonna matter more than probably anything else at that point.
So you mentioned there the gummy bears. It's funny because when I used to weight lift during hard training sessions, we would have a bag of gummy bears during, like we would eat like gummy bears during to help
Mhm.
like keep our energy up and stuff like that. When it comes to after training sessions, how should a athlete look at their nutrition? Should they have carbs right away? Should they have stay away from fats? Should they have a protein shake? Are they do they need to worry about their is it called kabot? What's the
Anabolic
afterward?
window.
Yeah, metabolic window. Do they need to worry about that or
So after
just
like
get
a
some food?
I mean, the short answer is no. Like, you never really need to worry about that as long as you're getting enough calories in throughout the day, enough protein in throughout the day. You never really need to worry about that. That would be something that you would consider more when it comes to like a strength training window and not a cardio or jujitsu window. But when it comes to like pre and post meals, pre and post training meals, it's going to depend on a few things. It's going to depend on what phase is this person in. Are they at maintenance? Are they in a deficit? You know, what are our limiting factors here? How many times a day are we training? So there are some variables that would turn, like, you would want to consider, but generally we're going to want to carb up, especially if it's a hard training session. So like at Autos, we have a 3 hour comp class from 6 to 9 a.m. No one's going to eat a bunch of food before that 6 a.m. class. So if you're eating within 2 hours of your training session, it's going to be all carbs, pretty much. Um, Probably, I mean, some people are just having honey before that session just so they can get some carbs
Oh,
in
wow.
them before the session, and it's too early for them to stomach a meal. Makes sense. I can't stomach a meal that early. I have a banana. But then after that meal, we're going to want to be sure to have a carb heavy meal after that training session. And because it's been 3 hours and this is probably our first real meal of the day, I'm going to include protein. I'm not going to worry too much about fat, but at that point, we're just worried about getting calories in, to be honest, to refuel and recover. So it depends on how, like, what time of day those training sessions are, how long, how intense they are, and what the rest of our day looks like. But that's just an example of a common type of schedule I see a lot, like an early training session, and then yes, we want a full meal after that. We don't have to obsess over exactly what's in it. Ideally, focused on carbs and refueling there, but we're going to want to get protein. We're going to want to get just overall calories.
You mentioned earlier weight cutting versus weight loss. Now, you're not saying that people shouldn't lose weight to work out or to compete in a lower bracket if they want to, right? Like if they have like a plan to lose weight. Now, you're for lower ranks, but you don't recommend that they cut weight. Let's talk about the difference between the two.
So, not necessarily. I think that, okay, well, let's talk about what weight cutting and weight loss is. So, weight loss is going to be a longer term strategy to, reduce your overall body weight. Most people want to see this coming from fat. Most people want to see, fat loss, muscle gain. They want to see their body look different. I actually don't think you should make that your goal, or I don't think competing should be your motivation for that. I
Hmm.
think they should be two separate things. So I don't think it's wrong to want to go down a weight class, depending on the person. I don't think it's wrong to want to go up a weight class. I don't think it's wrong to want to lose weight. But I do think that we should treat them as their own separate things, because what it takes to achieve that weight loss might not always be good for performance. It's going to distract your attention from actually learning jujitsu, especially if you are, newer and a lower rank. I say, focus on your jujitsu and let's separate this out, and let's not put pressure on that body comp goal, because truthfully, we don't know where your ideal body composition is going to be, where your ideal body is going to be, where that intersection is of lifestyle and weight and body composition. So instead of putting a demand on it, let's approach it with curiosity. Let's make the changes that we need to make to improve your lifestyle, to improve your life, to improve your health. And let's see how your body responds to that, instead of demanding, I will be this weight at this time on this day, right? That can get into a lot of kind of unhealthy mindsets. So I think weight loss is great, physique transformation is great, but it's a longer term thing. It's not something that we are going to do for like 2 weeks. I'm going to go into a 50% deficit and starve myself as I'm preparing for this competition. Like, that's not a weight cut. That is also not good for weight loss. So we want to go into a more moderate deficit, or like I said, just focus on the lifestyle change and let it happen slowly. So that's weight loss. Weight cutting, we are trying to reduce our body weight, but it's not weight that we expect to keep off. It's just the last 2 to 5 pounds, and it happens in the last 1 to 2 weeks leading up to a tournament, depending on when weigh-ins are relative to when that person competes. A lot of the weight that comes off during a weight cut is going to be water weight or food residue in our gut. And again, we can lose, let's say 5 pounds, but we expect it to come right back on the next day. This is not weight that so I hear a lot of people say, I'm weight cutting. And I'm like, no, you're not. You're actually trying to lose weight, and you're doing it way too aggressively, and you're going to go crazy. So a lot of people confuse these things, or they try to use them together. And while they can be used together, we can have a weight loss period, maintain a cute weight cut. That can work. But a lot of people try to do it all at the same time. I'm going to cut my calories drastically. I'm going to cut out carbs, and I'm going to try to dehydrate myself. And I'm going to try to sweat a week before my tournament. Like, that's not doing anything for you, And so people use acute weight cut strategies way too early. They use weight loss strategies in a very drastic way too late. And then no wonder you feel exhausted, tired, depleted when you go to compete. So we have to kind of understand the place of each of these things.
So, what makes a good weight cut for an athlete? And is it possible for an athlete to do it by themselves?
I recommend doing it with guidance. It can be very emotional. You can second guess yourself a lot. Even I've been in this industry for over a decade, and still, if I am taking myself through my own like nutrition, there will still be times where I'm like, wait, is this the right call? Uh, should I just fight up a weight class or whatever? So it's easy to psych yourself out, even knowing all the things. So I highly recommend having someone outside of yourself help you. It's not impossible to do it alone. It'll be much smoother if you have someone just take the reins for you and tell you this is how you should do it. This is what you should do. What makes a good weight cut? I think it depends on the person to a certain extent. Some people can tolerate deficits and having to like be very particular with their nutrition better than others. Other people like more freedom. So I think depending on you, when do you perform your best? When you can just have a regular day, or when you have to have a very particular eating regimen, basically. For some weight cuts, or for making weight, let's say making weight, so we don't get confused with the semantics. Someone making weight well could be, hey, I've taken 3 months to slowly drop weight, and now I'm maintaining for the last month, and I feel good, and I don't have to do an acute weight cut, and I got here slowly, and I feel good here, and I know my weight's probably going to go back up after this camp a little bit, but we can set where we want our maintenance range to be, right? So that's one way we can go about it. Another way we go about it is we're maintaining fairly close to where we need to be on competition day, and we just do that acute weight cut strategy. And so I think the minimum effective dose and what works well for that individual's like mindset is going to be the best. I don't think that there's one size fits all, but I think the crucial factors are we aren't rushing it, we're giving ourselves enough time, and we understand how to implement each of these tools.
What do you think when you see these extreme weight cuts on social media by jiu-jitsu athlete, MMA athletes? Patty Pimlin, he has a fight coming up, and he in the off season he's like over 200 pounds and he fights at lightweight. Right, he cuts all the way down to 155 in like a 8 week, 10 week period. What do you think when you see all these, even like in jiu-jitsu? I mean, we've seen some people on Instagram that are just covered in towels, crying, praying. Teams surrounded by them, like, you got this. You only got half a pound to go, half a pound to go. What do you see? What do you think when you see these things?
Yeah. So MMA is a little bit different. Do I think that the drastic weight cutting is good or healthy? Probably not, but you can cut a decent amount of water weight. And if you have like 24 hours to recover, probably not the end of the world. So it does depend on how close your competition is to weigh-ins. Now, IBJJF, most jiu-jitsu tournaments, we don't have 24 hours Lots of times we don't even have an hour, you know? ADCC, I think you have a little bit more time, but it's still not quite enough to fully like rehydrate. So for me, my opinion is that's not help. Like lots of people cut weight because they want to have a performance advantage, they want to have a size advantage. But if you are unable to refuel and rehydrate appropriately, your advantage is gone pretty much. And you would probably be much better off, especially if it's that much weight, just competing in the weight class above and going in strong, fueled, fed. Now, does this mean that if you are an overweight person, that there's going to be no advantage to getting down to a lower weight class over time? No, like that will probably benefit you. And so, being real with yourself about what is my limiting factor? Is it my weight? Is it my health? Is it my technique? Because just doing these drastic weight cuts normally isn't it. And if you are doing a weight cut and it's, say, 2 to 5 pounds, there's a much easier way to do it than dehydrating yourself right before a competition.
One thing that people always seem to be worried about too is supplementation with their diets, whether it's protein shakes, creatine, fish oils, whatever it is, right? They sometimes there can be a very big dogma mentality when it comes to supplementation. What are your views on supplementing? And then what would you recommend if you do recommend supplementation?
Yeah. So supplements aren't going to replace the fundamental lifestyle things, right? Getting enough calories, getting enough sleep, getting enough sunshine, laughing enough, like you can't replace those. If you are doing all the things that you are supposed to be doing as far as the basics go, uh enough carbs, enough food, enough calories, enough sleep, then there are things that we can take that will help. It's not going to be magic, but there are things that I do recommend to most of my athletes, most people in general. So creatine is awesome. Creatine is one of the best researched supplements that you can take. It's going to help with recovery. It even helps with cognitive function. There's more and more research coming out about that. So creatine is one that I recommend to most people. It will cause you to retain water. This is not a bad thing. This is how it works. In order to get nutrients into our muscles, in order to recover, our muscles need to be able to pull water into them. Creatine does that. And so, yes, you will retain water. No, it's not worth cutting it out for a weight cut. It's going to take, 3 weeks for your body to desaturate. And so you can probably benefit from the recovery benefits more than you're going to benefit from, losing a pound of water weight. Creatine, I recommend. Fish oil is great to make sure that you're getting enough good fats. Magnesium glycinate is another really great one for sleep and recovery. Beyond that, it is really going to depend on the individual. A lot of people are deficient in vitamin D. So, vitamin D 3 and K2 can help a lot of people. But again, if you're deficient, I don't know that about everyone, but most people are. If we're dealing with stress, things like that, there are supplements that we can take to use that. If you're really struggling to sleep, or if you struggle with anxiety, if you have blood sugar issues, there are supplements that can help, but those are more on an individual basis.
So when it comes to like a recommended protein supplement, right, like a protein shake or something like that, we've recently been graced by the gospel of the Fairlife. Those things
I
are
love
amazing.
Fairlife.
My gosh, they're amazing. We have the on TikTok. They got me. They got me. The
Yeah.
TikTok shop got me. I got the Fairlife Extreme, the 42 grams,
Yep.
the one so good. When it comes to like protein supplement, though, do people? There's a lot of marketing out there, and there's a lot of different styles of protein. You got protein concentrate, hydrolyzed whey isolate. Is that something most people should worry about? And is there any benefit between the different or between them?
The only thing I would say to worry about when it comes to protein is just making sure it's a complete protein. So, pretty much any protein powder, any whey protein powder is going to be a complete protein. Vegan proteins, I personally prefer vegan proteins. I like the
Hmm,
texture. I'm weird. A lot of people don't like them, but I put my protein in my oatmeal and I just
me
like it
too.
better when it's vegan protein. And so I just make sure I'm getting a complete vegan protein that has a full amino acid profile. But I think making sure it's a complete protein is the most important thing. Beyond that, we're getting into some details that aren't going to matter the most. And with my coaching company, I like to say I coach on the changes that matter most. And so, unless it really matters to that individual, like they're a little bit more advanced, we're not really going to.
What they to mention the things that matter, one thing I see on Instagram all the time too is people tracking their glycemic intake when it comes to certain foods, like their blood sugar response. And these are typically fit, healthy people that aren't diabetic, they're not pre-diabetic. Is that something people really need to worry about, the glycemic intake of a food or something like that?
No, I think that this whole like blood sugar spike thing has been totally taken out of context. We expect our blood sugar to spike after we eat nearly anything. It's going to spike more with certain foods than with others, but we expect that as a normal response. What would be not normal is if insulin didn't start doing its job. Most people don't have this problem, especially active, healthy people. Now, it's not impossible to have a healthy, athletic, fit, diabetic person. I have friends who are diabetic and they are healthy and they are fit,
Same. Yep.
and so like if you are diabetic, then yes, if you have any form of insulin resistance, then sure, we might want to pay a little bit closer attention to that. Most people don't have to worry about that. Again, as long as you are, living an active lifestyle, making good food choices most of the time, we expect our blood sugar to spike. It's normal.
Right. It,
That would be like saying, should I track my cortisol? It spikes every morning. And it's like, no, that's actually how you wake
that's
up.
yeah, that literally is exactly what it's supposed to.
Yeah. Like, should I like no, like let it do its thing.
Yeah, that's funny. When it comes to, you mentioned also, cutting foods out or having a healthy relationship with food. I mean, I'm drinking a zero sugar Sunkiss. These things are amazing.
So good.
But yeah, I started drinking, zero sugar sodas because obviously normal soda has a lot of calories in it, right? Like a can is like 100 calories, 120 calories with like 30 grams of sugar or whatever. When it comes to cutting foods or replacing them with, like a zero sugar, how do you feel about that? And what people are so worried about, aspartame or whatever it is. How do you ever run into athletes or people that are like, I don't want to drink that, or I don't want to do that because of I saw this research or I saw this person talk about this. Like, what do you
Oh
do?
man, I was in a jujitsu class actually, and afterwards the instructor was giving nutrition advice, and he said, eat clean, stay away from sugars and stuff. And in my head, I'm like, we just got done training for 3 hours, very
Yeah.
intense. Like, go eat some freaking sugar. like,
That's when you interrupt, like, actually don't listen to that. Do not listen to
like the utmost respect for what you are a black belt in, but like I am a black belt in nutrition, and it doesn't have to be pure sugar. Like it doesn't have to be that. It can be oats, it can be bread, it can be fruit, it can be literally anything. But like you need carbs after a training session like that. So I do think like this hyper focus on clean foods can sometimes be harmful to athletes. I also think a hyper focus on like no chemicals or real food. Like, yes, we want 80 to 90% of our food choices to be whole foods, single ingredients, simple foods is what I like to say. Simple foods, not packaged, right? But that doesn't mean that having a diet soda is bad. Having a diet soda is going to be far better for your health. Again, if it helps you stay within this caloric range that helps you maintain a healthy body weight and helps you perhaps curb a craving. So then you don't, you know, throw the towel in and go off the wall because you've been depriving yourself of something that, you would like to enjoy. So like there's this social aspect, this psychological aspect to food as well that I think is so important to take into consideration. And if we just say hard no, we are again missing the forest for the trees. Whereas diet sodas, it's actually shown in a lot of research studies that it has helped people lose weight because they aren't drinking the calorically dense regular soda. It's helping them stay sane. It even helps with satiety because carbonated drinks usually help you feel full. And so different people are going to respond differently. We still want boundaries with that. Do we want to be chugging diet sodas all day? No, probably not. Nothing is actually 0 calories, like it's rounded down. There's a 20% allowance that the FDA allows for variants on food labels. So nothing is actually 0 calories. They're just very, very, very low calorie. But that can still add up over time if we're using like sugar-free, 0 calorie everything. Our gut's probably not going to feel great if we're incorporating that in every meal all day. But occasionally, once a day, like you're good, you know? So,
Yeah, one thing that I saw someone was talking about, like, carbonating water, eating foods and drinking carbonated water, like, we talked on Instagram, like, I love Liquid
I
Death,
love liquid death.
I drink Liquid Death with my meals now, and it, like, helps out quite a bit, and it keeps the sanity, of, like I love soda, and
Mhm.
I'm always gonna drink soda, so it's like, I'm never gonna cut it out, so that's why I like the zero sugar, that's why I like Liquid Death, right? It gives me that fix to where I'm not, like, going insane like I need a something sweet. I need something
Yeah.
sweet. Like why do I need something carbonated. But I've been doing that recently too, and that's been helping out quite a bit.
Carbonated water,
But
I love sparkling water. Actually, funny story about liquid death. I don't drink alcohol. And when I first saw Liquid Death marketing, like their label, I thought it was like for sure like a White Claw. I thought it was some
same,
sort of
same.
alcoholic drink. And then or it's like it's either that or it's something with a ton of caffeine. And I don't drink energy drinks really. I not because I think they're bad, just because I like coffee and I don't need that much caffeine. So I used to stay away from Liquid Death. And then my husband got one. And I was like, why are you having that right now? And he was like, what? It's sparkling water. I was like, what? I
Yeah.
just got hooked on them because I swore that they were alcoholic or like crazy caffeinated, but it's just
Yeah, no,
sparkling
the
water.
same thing with me. The first time I saw them, I was like, is that alcoholic?
It's
I was like,
intense
I don't.
labeling.
Yeah, yeah, and their marketing is great, man. I
Yeah.
love it, and it fuels the social. I recently stopped drinking too, so now I drink like non-alcoholic beer if I do have something,
Mhm.
or I'll just drink a Liquid Death or something like that to feel like I'm part
It
of
looks
the
like you're a
situation.
part of it with when you have
Yeah,
liquid death in your
yeah.
hand.
Yeah, they just came out with the can too that looks like a Rainier can, which is like a light beer that we have up here in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
And so they have a tall boy. No, it looks like a Pabst Blue Ribbon or Rainier. Anyways,
Okay.
but it looks like that. And I'm like, oh man, I could drive down the street and like probably get pulled over because this can looks so fun, like looks so
Yeah.
close to it.
I've
But
had the same thought. But yeah, love
yeah.
that. Anyway, sorry, tangent.
No, if you could give, I'm not. Last time I asked one piece of advice to a white belt, but I kind of want to restructure the question for this conversation. If you could give someone one piece of advice when they're starting their nutrition journey, what would it be?
One piece of advice when you are starting your nutrition journey. Honestly, it would probably be to portion out your foods. So you lots of people think I'm only eating 1500 calories, I'm only eating 1200 calories and I'm not losing weight. There's a giant misconception about what portion sizes look like. And so I say this, even if you're only weighing your food, portioning out your food, even if you don't know how much food you personally need, it's going to give you a better idea of what a portion size actually looks like, and it is probably far different than you think it is in your head if you have never portioned out your food before. So I think that is a great way to bring a lot of awareness to what your actual consumption is. Even if you don't know what your needs are, at least bringing awareness to what your actual consumption is. Because that can, one, reduce frustration a lot if you realize, maybe I am having a bit more than I thought. And two, just bringing awareness so that if you ever do choose to work with someone, you kind of have a better starting place than just guessing. And that's something I do with all of my clients when we get started is we bring awareness to what our current habits are so we have a solid starting place to go from. Can I give the second one too?
Yeah, 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 yeah. Absolutely.
The second one would be to focus more on incorporating helpful foods. I don't even want to say good foods or bad foods, but helpful foods, nutrient dense foods, and less on eliminating the other stuff. Let's first focus most on incorporating helpful stuff. And that tends to help with things like satiety, help with things like cravings, instead of focusing on, okay, it's kind of like telling a little kid no, but not giving them anything else to do. If I tell you you can't eat that, but then I don't tell you how to replace it, that's going to be frustrating. But if we just focus on the behaviors we want, the other stuff is most of the time going to start to eliminate itself on its own.
Yeah, one thing I heard recently that I thought was super great was eat what you need and add what you want,
Hmm.
right? Like eat if you need a high protein meal, eat a high protein meal. But if you kind of want
A cookie goes on
something,
a
a
cookie.
cookie, have it. You know what I mean? Like it's
Yeah,
okay, and that's
100%.
helped me out quite a bit too.
I love that phrase. I'm probably going to steal that.
Well, I stole off the internet, so I'll have to find the source. But Rose, if people want to work with you in your brand new company and whatnot, where can they find all your information at?
Yeah, so you can check out shiftcoachingsystems.com, or you can just find me on Instagram, Rosie Rolls, ROSIE ROLLZ. And there's a link in my bio to apply for coaching.
Perfect. And you want to thank anyone else for
Yes, and thank you to Hyperfly, my sponsors. I love their gear. They are super size inclusive. We just made it so that you can buy different size gi tops and gi pants, which is great.
Oh,
They have short sizes, regular sizes. I love it. So check out Hyperfly and use my code Rosie Rolls Fly.
perfect. Well, Rose, thank you again for this phenomenal conversation. I had a blast. Definitely helped me think about some things in my nutrition journey, and hopefully able to help more people that might be struggling with some of these things that we talked about today. So I just want to thank you for coming on the show again.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. It was great to see you again.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you guys so much for listening, watching at home. Be sure to go check out Rose everywhere on social media. And if you want to work with her, I highly recommend it personally, but go check her out. So thank you guys so much for listening, watching at home, and I'll catch you later. Peace.